Can I play for food? The quiet voice of this 12-year-old girl rang through the Continental Hotel lobby, slicing through fancy conversations like a knife. Everyone stopped talking, turning toward the little black girl who just interrupted the city's fanciest charity cocktail party. Amelia Washington stood by the main hall entrance, her big, hopeful eyes locked on the shiny Steinway grand piano under those crystal chandeliers. Her simple, loose-fitting clothes looked so different from all the designer dresses and expensive suits around her. She held a beat-up backpack against her chest, like it could protect her. "How'd that kid get in here?" a blonde woman whispered, gripping her champagne glass tight. "Where's security?" This whole event was raising money for poor kids. Pretty ironic, considering Amelia had been sleeping in different shelters all week. She'd heard about this party when she walked past the hotel earlier, and something just made her want to try getting inside. Victoria Sterling, who organized this event and inherited a family fortune, walked over with careful steps. At 45, she perfectly represented the city's rich elite, educated, polished, and totally convinced she was morally superior. "Sweetie," she said with a fake smile, "this isn't the place for you. There's a McDonald's 2 blocks away." "I just wanted to play," Amelia said again, her voice getting surprisingly strong. "Just one song for a plate of food." Laughter started spreading through the crowd. "She thinks she can play piano," laughed a guy in a dark blue suit. "She probably doesn't even know where middle C is." "It's adorable how creative these kids get," another woman added, shaking her head like she felt sorry for her. "They see a movie and think they can do everything." But Amelia didn't look down. Something about how she stood there, this quiet strength, this silent confidence that seemed weird for a kid in her situation, like she knew something nobody else here had any clue about. Dr. Robert Chun, a famous pianist and judge for national competitions, watched everything from the back of the room. He'd noticed how this girl stared at the piano with a respect he barely saw, even in his advanced students. There was recognition there, like she knew it. "Victoria," Dr. Chun walked up. "Maybe we should let her play. After all, we're here to help talented young people, right?" Victoria laughed, a sharp, mean sound. "Robert, just look at her. Kids like this don't get music lessons. It's impossible." What nobody knew was that Amelia had lived for her first 8 years in a home where music was as important as breathing. Her grandmother, a classical pianist who never got the recognition she earned because of her skin color, had been her first and only teacher. When her grandmother died and Amelia got stuck in foster care, she carried with her not just the pain of losing everything, but a talent that even she didn't fully get. While everyone stared at her with disgust, Amelia stayed strong. Someone who'd survived much harder times and learned to find power in being vulnerable. Her fingers moved on their own, like playing a melody only she could hear, something she did to stay calm during the toughest moments. If you're loving this story about beating the odds and getting justice, don't forget to subscribe to see how one simple, innocent question was about to shut up a room full of prejudice and show off a talent that would change everything these people thought they knew about what humans can do. Victoria Sterling crossed her arms and laughed dramatically, like she'd just heard the world's most ridiculous joke. "Fine, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Since you're so insistent, let's make a little deal. You can play, but with some conditions." The crowd moved closer, sensing they were about to watch something cruel unfold. Victoria loved being the center of attention, especially when she could show off her moral superiority in front of other high society members. "First condition," Victoria announced, raising one perfectly manicured finger. "You play only one song and we pick which one. Second condition, if you manage to play decently, I'll personally pay for a full dinner. But," she paused for drama, "when you fail miserably, like we know you will, you leave here immediately and never bother respectable people again." "How mean," whispered an older woman in the back, but her voice got drowned out by the approving laughter from other guests. Amelia stayed still, eyes fixed on the piano. Something was happening in her mind, memories mixing with right now. She could almost hear her grandmother Betty's gentle voice. "When people try to put you down, let the music speak for you, honey. Music doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about prejudice." "I accept," Amelia said simply, her voice clear and strong. Dr. Chun watched, fascinated. Something about how this girl carried herself, the way she looked at that instrument, really intrigued him. In 30 years of judging pianists, he developed an instinct for spotting real talent, and something about this child made his expert senses tingle. "Perfect!" Victoria clapped her hands. "Now for the song." She looked around, searching for the hardest and most embarrassing choice possible. Her eyes landed on James Morrison, a mediocre pianist who played in local bars. "James, dear, what would be a good piece for our young artist?" James smiled wickedly. "How about Beethoven's Fürelise? Everyone who's ever sat at a piano at least once tries to play that piece. If she really knows anything, she should be able to handle it." This choice got laughter from the crowd, for Elise was considered a beginner's piece among regular people, but playing it perfectly needed refined technique and years of practice. It was the perfect trap. If Amelia only knew basics, she'd try to play and fail badly. If she knew nothing, she couldn't even start. "Excellent choice," Victoria clapped. "A song that any child who's ever had a piano lesson knows. No excuses for failure." Amelia nodded and walked toward the piano. Each step seemed filled with quiet determination that made some people in the back feel strangely uncomfortable. Something was off about this scene. A 12-year-old child shouldn't carry such dignity while facing this kind of humiliation. When she sat down on the piano bench, adjusting it to perfect height with precise, familiar movements, Dr. Chun felt chills run down his spine. Those weren't beginner movements. "Look at that," Victoria sneered to the guests near her. "She doesn't even know how to sit properly on the bench. She's probably never seen a real piano in her life." But Dr. Chun had noticed exactly the opposite. The bench adjustment, the straight posture, how Amelia's hands floated over the keys in perfect classical position. These were details that took years to master. Memories flooded Amelia's mind like a wave. Her grandmother, her grandma Betty Washington, had been one of the first black pianists to try entering the city's conservatory back in the 1960s. Her talent was undeniable, but doors stayed closed because of the prejudice back then. Betty channeled her passion by teaching community kids in her small home, turning her old upright piano into a gateway to classical music. "Music is the universal language, Amelia," Betty used to say while guiding her granddaughter's little fingers over the keys. "When you play from the heart, people listen with their souls, not their eyes." Amelia had spent countless hours at that piano, soaking up not just technique, but the deep musical understanding that only a true master can share. When Betty died and Amelia got separated from everything she knew, music stayed her only constant companion, played on imaginary pianos during lonely nights in shelters. "We're waiting," Victoria said, tapping her impatient fingers. "Or have you given up before even trying?" Amelia took a deep breath and put her hands on the keys. The touch felt like electricity. After months without playing a real instrument, feeling those keys under her fingers was like finding a lost part of her soul again. The first note rang through the hall with crystal purity that made several people look up surprised. It wasn't the hesitant amateur sound they'd expected. It was a note played with the confidence of someone who knows every detail of the instrument intimately. Dr. Chun moved closer quietly, his professional curiosity fully awakened. That first note had been played with perfect technique, precise attack, perfect sustain, controlled tone. These were details that only years of serious training could produce. "Coincidence," Victoria muttered, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Amelia began the main melody of Für Elise, and every note flowing from her hands was like a small miracle. No hesitation, no technical mistakes. The music came naturally, like she and the piano were one single organism. But there was something else, an emotional maturity in her interpretation that left Dr. Chun completely amazed. How she shaped the melodic passages, controlled the dynamics, let the silence between notes speak as much as the music itself. This was mature artist work, not an untrained child. The hall had gone completely silent. Champagne glasses stayed frozen in guests' hands. Conversations stopped. Even the waiters quit moving. Everyone was mesmerized by that small figure at the piano, creating music of unexpected and breathtaking beauty. Victoria felt growing uneasiness in her stomach. This wasn't going according to plan. The public humiliation she'd orchestrated was turning into something completely different, something totally beyond her control. As Amelia played, lost in music flowing through her like a natural force, one single question echoed in everyone's minds. Who was this girl really, and what secrets was her music about to reveal? As Amelia navigated the most complex passages of Fur Elise, Dr. Chun felt his heart racing. 40 years of evaluating musical talent had sharpened his instincts, and what he was witnessing defied all logic. This girl's technique wasn't just competent, it was extraordinary. The descending arpeggio passage, which stumped even advanced students, flowed from her fingers like crystal clear water. Each note had weight and purpose, each pause breathed with mature musicality. Dr. Chun watched in fascination as she controlled the sustain pedal with the precision of a professional concert pianist. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself, moving even closer to the piano. Victoria, sensing the atmosphere change, felt the first alarm bells ringing in her mind. Conversations had stopped completely. Even waiters had stopped serving, mesmerized by the music that transformed the hall into an impromptu concert venue. "She must have memorized this song from some YouTube video," Victoria said loud enough for others to hear, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. Kids these days copy anything from the internet. But her explanation sounded increasingly weak. What Amelia was doing transcended imitation. It was pure interpretation, loaded with emotional understanding that only came with years of serious study, and more importantly, real experience. She had witnessed countless prodigies in her career, from 5-year-olds playing Mozart to teenagers mastering Rachmaninoff. But she'd rarely seen such a combination of flawless technique and musical maturity in someone so young, especially under such unlikely circumstances. Amelia reached the climax of the piece, where the main melody returns with renewed force after the virtuosic passages. Her hands danced across the keys with a familiarity that revealed hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of dedicated practice. It was impossible to fake that level of intimacy with the instrument. Memories flowed through the music like an underground river. Amelia could hear her grandmother Betty's voice echoing through the years. "Music isn't about playing the right notes, my dear. It's about telling a story that only you can tell." Betty Washington had been more than a teacher. She was a visionary who saw the future through her granddaughter's small fingers. Born in 1940, she grew up when black pianists were systematically excluded from prestigious conservatories and concert halls. Her response was to turn her own home into a musical temple where community children discovered that classical music belonged to them too. "The world will try to tell you that certain things aren't for people like us," Betty used to say while adjusting Amelia's posture on the piano bench. "But music knows no color, knows no poverty, knows no limits. It only knows truth." For 8 blessed years, Amelia absorbed not only technique but musical philosophy. Betty taught her that each composer had a unique language. Chopin spoke of longing, Beethoven of struggle and triumph, Mozart of crystal clarity and joy. More importantly, she learned that her musical voice was equally valuable. When Betty died suddenly of a heart attack, Amelia didn't just lose her grandmother, she lost her world. The foster care system separated her from music, from the piano, from everything that gave meaning to her existence. For 4 years, she carried melodies only in her mind, playing imaginary keyboards in the cold dormitories of shelters. But now, in this surreal moment at the Continental Hotel, it all came back. Every lesson, every gentle correction, every word of encouragement from Betty flowed through her hands. As if no time had passed, Dr. Chun watched in awe as Amelia played the final coda of the piece. How she controlled the dynamics, starting pianissimo and building to a majestic forte before returning to the delicate whisper of the beginning, revealed a musical understanding that took decades to develop. "Please tell me you're seeing this too," he whispered to his colleague beside him, a piano professor at the local university. "This child, she's not just talented, she's a phenomenon." Victoria Sterling felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her carefully orchestrated strategy to humiliate a vulnerable child was turning into the exact opposite of what she'd planned. Instead of confirming her prejudices, Amelia was forcing everyone to question their most basic assumptions about class, race, and merit. "It has to be a trick," Victoria muttered to her closest friends. "No one learns piano like that out of nowhere. She must have had expensive private lessons hidden somewhere." But even as she spoke, Victoria knew her words sounded increasingly desperate. The child before her was demonstrating a level of excellence that money alone couldn't buy. She was playing with soul, with lived history, with a depth that came from places privilege could never reach. Amelia played the final chords of Fur-Elise with a delicacy that made several people in the audience hold their breath. When the last echo died in the absolute silence of the hall, she kept her hands suspended over the keys for a moment, as if reluctant to break the magical connection between her and the instrument. Then slowly, she turned on the bench to face the silent crowd. No trace remained of the shy child who had begged for food. In her place sat a young artist who had just claimed her place in the world through the universal language of music. Dr. Chun was the first to break the silence, his hands coming together in respectful applause that echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Gradually, others joined in until the Continental Hotel vibrated with genuine acclaim. Victoria looked around in growing panic. Her attempt at public humiliation had turned into a celebration of the talent she had tried to deny. Worse still, she could see in the other guests' eyes a question that haunted her. If they were so wrong about this child, what else were they wrong about? Amelia remained seated calmly, allowing the applause to wash over her like rain after a long drought. But behind her eyes, something was forming, not arrogance, but a growing understanding of her own power. She had proven her point, but this was only the beginning. Dr. Chun approached the piano, his expression a mixture of admiration and professional curiosity. "Child," he said softly, "may I ask where you studied? Your teacher must be extraordinary." Amelia looked him straight in the eye, and for a moment she allowed all the pain of the last 4 years to show in her expression. "My grandmother taught me," she replied simply. "She said music was the one thing no one could take away from me." The answer struck Dr. Chun like lightning. A grandmother, not an expensive conservatory. Family love, not purchased privilege. Talent cultivated at home, not in elite institutions. Everything he believed about how musical excellence was created was being challenged by a 12-year-old who had just redefined his expectations of greatness. While the hall still echoed with reluctant admiration, Amelia knew she had crossed a line. She could no longer pretend to be just a lost child begging for food. Her music had revealed too much, promised too much. Now, with all eyes on her, and expectation hanging in the air like thick perfume, she had to decide how far she was willing to take this revelation, and whether she was ready to show these privileged people what a worthless child could really do when music spoke through her soul with the force of generations of denied dreams. Dr. Chun approached the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something sacred. "Young lady," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to ask you a very important question. What is your full name?" "Amelia Washington," she replied, maintaining the same calm she had shown throughout the evening. The name struck Dr. Chun like a bolt of lightning. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Washington. Betty Washington. Are you Betty Washington's granddaughter?" Amelia nodded silently, and Dr. Chun covered his face with his hands. "My God," he murmured. "Betty Washington was one of the greatest pianists this country has ever produced. She should have played at the best conservatories in the world, but—" His voice faltered, heavy with ancient pain. Victoria watched the exchange with growing unease. "Robert, what are you talking about? Who is Betty Washington?" Dr. Chun turned to her with an expression that mixed disbelief and disgust. "Victoria, Betty Washington was a legend in the music community. A virtuoso who was systematically excluded from conservatories and concert halls because of her color. She became one of the most respected private teachers in the country, training dozens of professional musicians." The crowd murmured, some recognizing the name from their own musical experiences. Betty Washington was whispered about in musical circles as a teacher who could transform any dedicated student into an exceptional artist. But that was decades ago, Victoria said, her voice sounding increasingly defensive. And even if that story is true, it doesn't change the fact that she's a homeless person begging for money at a private event. It was then that Amelia rose from the piano bench. For the first time that evening, she allowed her true personality to emerge completely. The submissive posture disappeared, replaced by an unshakable dignity that made several people in the room step back unconsciously. "Miss Sterling," Amelia said, her voice clear and firm, "you are right about one thing. I shouldn't be here tonight." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I should be at Carnegie Hall in New York, where I have a recital scheduled for next week." A deathly silence fell over the room. Victoria felt the floor move beneath her feet. "My name is Amelia Washington," she continued, "and I am the youngest classical pianist ever accepted into the Juilliard School's Young Artists program. I am also the current national champion of classical piano for under 15s. She paused again, allowing the information to sink in. "The reason I am here tonight is not because I need food or money." Dr. Chun watched fascinated as the puzzle pieces fell into place in his mind. "The documentary," he murmured. "You're making the documentary." Amelia nodded. "Exactly. I'm collaborating with PBS on a documentary about prejudice and access to the arts. My producer suggested that I attend charity events for arts education disguised as a young person without resources to document how privileged people really treat those they consider inferior." The revelation fell on the room like a bomb. Victoria felt all the blood drain from her face. You're filming us?" "Hidden cameras," Amelia confirmed calmly. "High-definition audio and video. Everything that happened here tonight has been documented for national broadcast." Victoria looked around desperately, searching for cameras, for any sign that this was a cruel prank. "That's illegal! You can't film us without consent." "Actually," Dr. Chun interjected, his voice laden with dark satisfaction, "you signed image releases when you came in. It's written quite clearly on the ticket that this event could be filmed for documentary purposes." He smiled grimly. "I'm sure no one read the fine print." The crowd began to stir, people whispering frantically to each other, some already reaching for their phones to check their tickets. The panic was palpable. "The first part of the documentary," Amelia continued, ignoring the growing chaos, "will focus on how talent and potential are overlooked when they come packaged in appearances that defy privileged expectations. The second part will show how people who claim to be defenders of the arts react when confronted with real art coming from unexpected sources. I simply documented your true personalities when you thought there would be no consequences." Dr. Chun approached Amelia with deep respect. "May I ask, what do you intend to do with this recording?" "The documentary will air nationally next month," Amelia explained, "but I've also created a YouTube channel where I post shorter versions of these social experiments. My latest video, filmed at a similar event in Boston, currently has 2.5 million views, especially when it comes from people who pretend to be virtuous while practicing the very prejudices they claim to fight." The crowd watched in horror as Victoria faced the reality of her situation. In a matter of days, her cruelty would be seen by millions of people. Her name would forever be associated with the kind of prejudice and elitism she had so clearly demonstrated. "Mrs. Sterling," Amelia said, addressing the event organizer directly, "you have spent this entire evening telling me that people like me don't deserve to be in places like this, that we have no value, talent, or right to participate in high culture." Her voice gained a strength that silenced the entire hall. "Tomorrow, the whole world will see exactly the kind of person you really are." Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The magnitude of her impending public humiliation was simply too great to process. Dr. Chun looked around the room, seeing the panic on the faces of the other guests. "How many other events have you filmed?" "This is the 12th, Amelia replied. "And it's always the same, people who claim to value art and education, but who immediately judge and dismiss talent based solely on appearances." She turned to face Victoria one last time. "The difference between you and me, Mrs. Sterling, is that when I was actually homeless for a few months after my grandmother's death, I learned that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching. The silence in the hall was deafening. Every person present knew that their words and actions that night would be judged by millions of strangers, and most knew that there was no possible defense for what they had demonstrated. As Amelia discreetly collected a small recording device hidden in her backpack, one question hung in the heavy air of the Continental Hotel. How many other privileged and prejudiced people had discovered too late that the young woman they had despised had the power to reveal their true nature to the whole world? 6 months later, Victoria Sterling watched from the window of her small apartment as the limousine pulled up in front of Carnegie Hall. Amelia Washington, now wearing an elegant concert gown, waved to fans before entering the theater where she would make her debut as the youngest soloist of the season. The documentary, Faces of Discrimination, had gone viral, racking up over 15 million views on YouTube alone. Victoria had become the national symbol of elitist hypocrisy, losing not only her position in all charitable organizations, but also the respect of the high society she valued so much. Former charity event organizer exposed as prejudiced in viral documentary, read the headlines in local newspapers for weeks. Her luxury events company lost all its important clients, and she now worked as an assistant at a small law firm, trying to rebuild a reputation that might never fully recover. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun had become Amelia's official mentor, helping her navigate the world of professional classical music. The Continental Hotel, embarrassed by the public exposure, created a scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians, naming Amelia as its official ambassador. Music knows no color, social class, or zip codes, Amelia said in her first national interview after the incident. It only knows truth and passion, and when you have both, no barrier can stop you. The impact of the documentary transcended entertainment. Music schools across the country started community outreach programs, conservatories revised their admissions processes, and hundreds of talented young people from underprivileged communities were given opportunities that had previously been denied to them. Victoria, watching Amelia triumph where she herself had tried to humiliate her, finally understood the most painful lesson of her life. Dignity and talent cannot be bought with money, inherited with surnames, and definitely not measured by the color of one's skin or the address where one comes from. Amelia's best revenge was not to destroy Victoria. It was to prove that true greatness transcends prejudice, and that sometimes those we least expect carry the most extraordinary gifts. If this story of overcoming adversity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how true excellence always finds its way, regardless of the obstacles that try to block it.